Hi, this is episode 3 of Polytheistic Ramblings, and this episode is going to be about Loki's philosophy and a bit of mythology as well. But before I get into that, I want to make a disclaimer. One, I am not telling people what to think or to believe or anything like that. These are just my observations, my opinions, and my beliefs. I want to make that clear. Two, I am a provisional syncretic polytheist who syncretizes the Norse and Kemetic traditions. I take a more historical and mythological approach to my practice, as well as a scientifically informed view as well. 3. I am not an academic or a historian or anything like that. I am just a practitioner who is interested in these different things and who has had multiple conversations with a psychologist, sociologist, and theologian, as well as I've read a lot of books and articles and watched a lot of interviews by actual academics. But that's the end for that. So let's get into the main topics. Loki. I'm not a Lokian, and I don't consider myself a Lokian because I don't think Loki is a Jotun. I think he is a god. I think he is one of the Aesir. I acknowledge that he's half like Odin, like Thor, like everyone else, even though his parentage is a little weird. But I still consider him a god, and that's one of the reasons, because I don't really agree with this idea that he was adopted by Odin as a blood brother, because he is never referred to as being adopted ever. Ever. Never. So it's not something I believe. You might have different standards, and I know that he wasn't, we have tentative circumstantial evidence that he was worshipped in history, but still, that's not my standard. That's someone else's standard, not mine. Okay. So number 2, why I don't exactly agree with why I don't consider myself a Lokian, is the idea of aspects. I think the gods' actions are actions. I don't think they reflect, internal existence of the gods. On top of that, I'm not a mythic literalist. I think the myths aren't consistent. I think they are disconnected most of the time. There is no canon. They are not holy scripture. They're like fan fiction or like Elseworld in comics. Um, they don't connect, and I don't expect them to connect. But really, it's also the fact that people think of him as like the whole, world breaker idea is something that I just really can't get behind, because what do people actually mean by that? They mean like Ragnarok, meaning that they're mythic literalists and they believe that Ragnarok actually happened or is going to happen. I technically believe in an apocalyptic sense, but that's because according to physicists, the sun, the galaxy, and possibly even the universe has an expiration date. But I don't think that has anything to do with Ragnarok. Ragnarok seemed to be a response to what happened in 536, considering it's specifically 3 years, and that's how long the Fimbul Winter lasted. That's how long the mini ice age, essentially. What led to a mini ice age and extreme death due to the Justinian plague. So that's what I think about Ragnarok, right? And so I don't really think I think it is just a narrative. I don't think these things actually happened. I'm kind of weirdly indifferent to the whole Ragnarok thing. Also, I don't think what the gods did in these stories can really tell us about how they interact or think about humans, especially with Loki, who doesn't seem to dislike humans at all. Who thinks that Odin's treatment of them isn't actually a good thing, according to Lucas anyway. Yeah, sure, he's kind of mean to a child in Gylfaginning, but still, he isn't trying to kill any humans anyway. And that's kind of where my stance on it is, that he doesn't do anything to humans, so why should I distrust him? Again, I don't think the gods, because I don't actually think the gods' relationships reflect what the relationships with can reflect very can indicate what their relationships with a human would be ultimately. I think that's too much of a generalization. But that's me. Now let's get into the main other topics I wanted to talk about. Well, I'll get into those in a minute, but really I want to finish up with this whole Loki idea. The other reason that I don't really consider myself a Lokian, but also just why I don't really feel connected to the community, the pagan community in general, is this ultimate idea that, what is it? Oh yeah, Loki is always trying to do destructive things, and he's never consistent about things. He actually is fairly consistent. He's always planning shit, right? He's always coming up with a plan, and that's fine. And he's fairly consistent with what he does. He plans things out and isn't sporadic. He isn't that sporadic. His thing on chaos and or destruction, um, his idea of chaos and destruction, but I'll get into that and when I'm talking about change, is he does plan things out. He does, you know, not always want certain things to happen. And he's pretty specific in the way he does it, and even is quite boastful about it in Loki. Uh, but actually, that brings me to my next point, which is change. Um, yeah, change. Um, this idea that change is always good and change is always desirable. I'm going to separate this from personal growth, which I'll talk about next. Uh, So change is like he's always trying to change things. Yes, but he seemingly makes a distinction between good change and bad change. Right? Is Asgard being destroyed a good thing? At least before Ragnarok, does he think thinks Asgard destruction is a good thing? No, he doesn't. Seemingly, if we're going by the myths, he doesn't. Like he tries to prevent Piazzi from invading and destroying Asgard, right, and taking over because it's his home. Because he is trying to ultimately protect his home. Does he think others destroying it? In Thrymskreda, he, straight up stands up to Thor and says, stop this nonsense. If we don't do something, they're going to be living here and we'll be dead. So clearly not. He wants to protect Asgard. He is actually dedicated to protecting Asgard. He even kind of boasts about that in Lokasena. In Lokasena when he says, I was the first and last one off the battlefield, and basically saying, hey, I fought the enemy, we're alive, thank me. It's like, he's quite prideful of that fact. So it's not about destruction is always good, chaos is always good, or whatever, that, it's always a good thing. Like we need this change and we need to shake this up. That's called toxic positivity. The central idea that people have is actually toxic positivity. It is toxic positivity because it is toxic positivity because there is this idea of, well, change is always good and change is always desirable. But if you were watching your house burn to the ground, if you had to watch it burn to the ground, or if you've ever had to watch your home be burnt to the ground, even if you're living someone else, it hurts. It is not a desirable thing. You don't want that to happen. It isn't like, oh, that's a growth thing. It's just, it acknowledges the pain. It hurts. It is not always a good thing. It isn't actually a good thing. Not intrinsically anyway. It's a neutral thing. As someone who actually, and this is coming from someone who actually had to watch my whole family's entire, property burn to the ground. I've watched it on video. It's not a pleasant thing to watch. It actually hurts to watch that shit. If people talk about, oh, their life was disrupted, but I'm going to assume people aren't going to say that when their whole house, their whole property burned down or something. It isn't always a good thing, and sometimes it's a neutral thing. But even Loki sort of seemingly fights against the wrong kind of change, where he is trying to stop invaders from coming into Asgard. He's trying to stop them from taking over Midgard. He cares about these things, clearly. You know, it's actually one of the things that he goes up against Odin on. Like, he doesn't like Odin's treatment of humans, right? Um, um, so yeah, change isn't always a good thing. It isn't always a desirable thing. And actually, let's get into a bit of a history on that. People did not always want change to happen. And this actually connects to this idea, which I kind of just going to condense it here. Time, the time. Time is not linear. Like, people did not see time as being linear. They actually, there were cults that wanted to stop time. They wanted to stop change from happening because they thought they could make a paradise on Earth if they could just get time to stop. They could get, change to stop, essentially. So change wasn't always desirable, and it isn't always desirable, because I actually agree with Sven Brinkman on this, that change, change, we need constancy. Actually, in his book, the Stand Firm, he talks about constancy. It's like, if your dentist was like, he kind of talks about, like, if you had an appointment or whatever, and you had an obligation, you were supposed to show up at this specific time and you didn't, people would think you're a prick. You're not magically, whimsically, magical, blah blah blah. No, you're an asshole. That's the issue of constancy. You need to actually be constant. And then, like, this idea of, like, people wanted to settle and put down roots. That's actually what creates a lot of social problems right now, is we can't put down roots because the economy and economics and stuff is not sustainable. So people cannot put down roots. They cannot have children. And that's, but the thing about, about economy and stuff is, like, if people do not have children and they don't settle down and they don't keep growing the population, there will be no future. There will be no progress. There will be no change. Like, this gets me into my next point, which is personal progress. This whole personal progress narrative, again, also has to do, this idea is intrinsic to this idea of perfection, that you can reach some higher state, which is perfection. But my question is, does perfection actually exist? Even if it does exist, is it a desirable thing? And to me, it is not, because I believe everything is intrinsically flawed. Um, do we want to reach this ultimate state of enlightenment or whatever? No, because that ignores human nature. We are never going to be able to evolve or whatever, or reach past our, you know, you know, moral and thing limitations. No one is, for example, a moral relativist. You don't live your life like that. Nor do you live your life by this creed of no lying. It is not possible to live your life like that. I actually agree with John Gray on that you're not able to live your life by this. People, and Jackson Crawford, when he says that, people may profess something, but and this is proven by psychology. People may profess something, but they don't live their life by it. Because behavior is not conscious action, and that's why I mean by the aspect thing. It's like, behavior is not actually ultimately conscious action. So can you say that about the gods? That's actually why I don't agree with the idea of aspects, because if behavior is not ultimately conscious action, and you do things without thinking about it, is an action that is done consciously the same thing as a part of yourself? The answer is kind of not really. I'm simplifying these things, but still, they're very interesting to think about. And then there's this idea of psychological polytheism, which is a thing, which is to say, you completely I guess is essentially you disassociate. There's the conscious and the unconscious, the things that you're not aware you're doing. Right. So on. And that is just as much as you, but it is not a different faceted of you. It is just you, simply. It is not a part of you. It is you. Right? So, and I don't really believe in this idea of growth anyway, because I don't think we can grow ourselves. Right? Not really. Yeah, sure, we change, kind of, but we can never reach an ultimate state or whatever. But that doesn't mean that growth and the changes will keep continuing. There has to be an end, right? There has to be an end. It can't keep going on because it is not sustainable, not mentally, not emotionally, not ever. Because everyone has their limit and has their breaking point. I know a lot of people have never reached it, but as someone who has, it ain't pleasant. I wouldn't describe it as, oh, it changed me. I would describe it as being horrible. You know, uh, and this desire for destruction isn't always what we want. And, again, toxic positivity, this idea that, well, if the world is destroyed, then you could just rebuild. It's like, not if everything is destroyed. And there is a limit to that. There is a limit within yourself before you just give up. You have a limit to yourself. So no, not really. But that also kind of brings me into the last idea I kind of wanted to talk about briefly. The idea of flaws. The gods are flawed. We are flawed. Human nature cannot ultimately be reached above. Not really. It's like I don't really believe in the spiritual woo-woo bullshit. Okay. I think there's a limit to these things. Right. I think there is a limit to what we can do, even in interaction with the gods. Right. The gods come down to our level. We can never really meet the gods where they are at, and so on. But the gods are flawed. They are not flawless. Though we love to play lip service to this idea that the gods are flawed. People do not act that way. And again, this is what I mean by behavior versus action. Like people may profess one thing, but their actions speak another. You know. Right. And so, but basically the gods are flawed. It's not just Loki, it's also Odin and Thor. They do things as well. Loki isn't, just the bad one because of the shit he did. And it comes to like Sev or Idun or any of those. It's also that, it's also Odin. Odin is like, oh yeah, rape is fine by me. And Thor doesn't seem to have a problem with that. And we need to acknowledge the gods' flaws. But anyway, that's where I'm going to end it here. I think I've gone on long enough. All right, bye.